The times of war have risen, and the fires of conflict are fueled more and more by hate and discrimination. There may arise a time of new empires, but that time only exists if we allow it to. Time is not infinite. It's a cruel truth, but we don't exist long enough to keep this nation in balance and peace. I fear that our empire may fall if a bad ruler arises, and that our people may suffer from it. But at least I got to meet my family and see this world for myself. I'm truly grateful for what we have. Emperor Janahid, the beloved of the Mason Empire, the fading words of our beloved emperor. And with that we begin episode 33. Thank you guys for tuning in for this episode, and we quickly have a lot of things going. I will talk about this in the next video, but more than likely we have I have updated the year time layer and the ideology layer. 4 new ideologies will arise, but we'll talk about that later. If you guys like the video, please hit that like button and the subscribe button to help the video and my channel out, as we're close to 50 subscribers, and once we get there I'm making a special video talking about what the world here looks like, and at 100 we'll get a few other things going on too, so that's something that will happen. Also, don't ask what happened here, I'll talk about that at some point. But let's go and get into this video. So last episode we were talking a lot down here and around here, but at this point you can see a lot of the world has been filled in. That's because off camera I did some episode making, and during that episode I got a bit lazy, and now I'm lazier and I don't want to get rid of all of this. But more importantly, Hungary is now a thing. With Hungary being a thing, we have a big problem, since Hungary is still big. Yes, it is. But the biggest problem is it has a shit border. And wanna know how I fix shit borders? Well, but that's called indiscrimination. And that's what's happening over here in the Italic and Scythian lands. Except for Bulgosk, they are trying to save as many of their people as possible. But for Hungary, it's sad. Even though they're basically not Hungarian at this point, they're more Romanian than they are Hungarian. And plus they're not in Hungary at this point. Hungary is around these areas over here. The biggest thing that has happened is that these Italic nations, these 3 Italic and Montenegro, have expanded into these areas. And they have started to enslave the local people, and those who they capture from the raiding parties of these guys, they also sell into slavery. And currently the main commodity of every nation here is the common Neanderthal slave. Now, why is it common? I'll talk about that in episodes when we get to 50 subscribers. Stay tuned for that. But going over to Roma or Romania, we see that Romania is on the warpath. Since its inception, it has been, well, since its forming, it has done practically nothing but make cities and towns. Not cities, but towns and villages. But its neighbor over here has done mostly nothing but really consolidate its lands that it had. And Rome wants those lands. And we see that I have finally given these guys a name. Since this area over here, or this area at least, should be Campania, then actually this should be Rome. This area should be Rome. I think there's like a river going through here, so it might not be, but I think that around this area over here, like this area, yeah, this area, I need to look at the map real quick. I need to consolidate my own thoughts. I have consulted. These guys are definitely the Romans, and over here is the Samnites technically, because these guys are in the Samnite areas. Over here would be, actually this would be Campania down south over here. Let me reconsult to make sure. I have consulted, this is not Campania, Campania is actually in this region. So we know where Campania is, we know where the Samnites are, and I can also call this guy the Samnites. And quickly, we do see that the Samnites are going to try and help out their neighbor over here, the grey neighbor, the Umbri. But we quickly see that the Umbri are unable to defend and unable to defend against anything. And quickly after their takeover, we see that Rome will go again on the warpath, sieging and taking over this town and its other compatriot town over here. But seeing this this nation over here quickly unites its lands over here, and we see Florence quickly decides to ask Rome to stop its expansions and maybe give it a bit of the lands over here, which are given to it, but only 2 villages and a town, which it did not really ask for, but well, yeah. Also here, this guy also bought this area because these guys didn't really want this Norman area, and also it was kind of straining their economy. But going back to these guys, we see that over the course of a few minutes, not few minutes, but few years, they start to take over these regions. Also, a quick note: the year time is this. This is the current year, and this is on this year right here is at the end of the video. So we'll look at like 21 years of conflict going on. And currently this is the ancient era, which was here, and this is the years that we're going through. And every time we see something like this means we're going to hit a new era, which is going to be weird since we are in the age of conflict, which is truly the age of something. But during the many attacks on the enemies over here, Rome has started to make a few allies, and that is they had made an ally of these guys and these guys, that being the Venetians and Nauplosians. The Nauplosians very much hate the Samnites, and currently, yes, they are pretty strong. They are basically the strongest Italian nation at this point, if you don't count Carthage as Italian, because well, they have some Italian territories. But basically, Genoa really wants to attack the Venice, but they're not able to because 2 nations are over here, and these 2 hate them, so they have, yeah. Basically, all of that is a complex thing. Going back to Rome. And Rome, at this point, is like, what if we went to war against the Samnites? Only us. You 2 don't have to go to war. This guy can join us if they want to take back their southern regions over here. And we quickly see that this guy, aka Nauplosia, agrees to this, because that would kind of defend their image. And in like a year's time, we see that Nauplosia has gifted some troops in terms of mercenaries, actually, because they want to keep all things on the wraps. They have given mercenaries, wink wink, over to the Romans, and we quickly see that the Romans actually help out the guys over here, who eventually take back their town over here, and even take back some of their old lands over here, which now puts them very much on the map. But going back to some areas that we haven't been to in a while, we see that the inter-Albanian war will begin, as these 2 Albanian nations will fight. Although strong enough to take out this nation, the Blue Nation underestimated its strength and thought that holding only a few people against a few dozen people would be a great idea. It wasn't, and they quickly lost a town for it. In agreement with that, this Macedonian nation over here was like, time to recreate their Macedonian empire from another nation, a world that is, and they quickly invaded into the Albanian lands. Although the Albanians would quickly try and stop this, we quickly see that the Blue Albanian nation only riled up its people enough to rebel in some of the northern occupation areas of the southern Albanian nation, and mostly in the occupation areas over here, although the town over here had no strength over this one last village in the lands that the Macedonians held. But the further attacks over here caused the Albanians to lose even more territory, causing them a lot of bad consequences, and we quickly see that it will be very bad for them. The Montenegrins at this point were like, you know what, we can't hold this area, it's already becoming a bit unstable. How about we just sell this land over here off? And what they did was sell it to these guys. And quickly we see that Hungary starts to buy as much land as possible. Over here the border looks bad, and the people are very mad at the people over here. Holding this area is not very good. Also politically it's bad, so these guys give it away. And we quickly see that this guy is the only one that doesn't give them away, because these areas away, because they only give 4 little pixels away, and that's all they give. We quickly see that Hungary starts a small war over here, managing to win in about a few months. The Slovenians, again, another war, they win again. Then another war, yes, again they win. It's basically a winning spree for them. They're not getting too cocky because they know that the Polish are now on the borders as they were before, but now they have a larger border. And at this point the Transylvanians have heard that these two are beginning a bit of tension between them. And the Transylvanians are like, what if we had these two fight each other, had them weaken each other, and then they made it themselves, these nations, and then help the Odessians take over maybe Crimea of this area. Should be good. Although their plan goes pretty well, the place that they executed is technically on their border, but they quickly are like, yo, this might go bad if we only put it on the border. And then they just expand it over here, which makes it look like an invasion. And this guy getting news of it is not very happy. Why is this here? No. And we quickly see that I think Frazy over here was like, fuck, and threw something at the thing over here. That's a good sound effects. But we do see that many attacks over here from the mercenaries over here that are getting through here eventually are cut off when a counterattack over here is made, because they thought maybe if we go like over here, then take this and get straight through there instead of going through here would be a great idea. And turns out this guy who kinda was like, oh, our people are being attacked, what the hell? And then they heard, oh, it's the Norman nation. What was that? I don't know. But we quickly see that many of these forces of the Blues quickly moved in these regions and took them all out, and we quickly see that many Bulgarian regions start to fight each other. Eventually this guy manages to take back some of its territories, although not all of it, and this area is again fueled by arriving troops. And we see that the inter-Bulgarian war kind of causes this guy to sadly sell its lands over here away to its enemies for more money. We see that Macedonia, that has new slave populations, slaves, quickly starts to put them to use. And that's by building up its infrastructure, building up its military bases, everything. They just use the people over here as just slaves. This area becomes very important because it's like very good, and if I'm gonna be honest, any of these three borders would look better with this, but yeah. And we quickly see that Bulgaria over here is fighting a pretty good war because they have Ankara and support, and over here Misowa is kind of supporting them too. Speaking about Misowa, we're gonna get into them in a bit, but back to the war over here. The Inter-Samnite War, as it's called, and we quickly see that the Inter-Samnite War quickly escalates into the Great Samnite War, meaning that the Samnites are greater at this point. And we quickly see that the Greater Samnite War begins with not only This guy's pushing very far, but this guy pushing in this region. Now Naplosia wants these regions over here because it would kind of help them expand over here. But they also want to wait until the capital is taken, so yeah. But once the capital is taken, it actually appears that these guys have already taken this town and pushed into these regions. And the Naplosians aren't very happy about it. And then the Romans take this. And during the peace negotiations, we see that many things go a bit wrong during the negotiations, although not many. The prime things that do go wrong is that when these guys overestimate how much territory they had, they estimated that they had this. In truth, it was somewhere around here. Actually, it was very much less. It was like there. But nonetheless, they will gain that territory and a bit more as revenge for earlier wars between these two groups. The Romans took this, and we quickly see that they even took a bit more territory over here, giving them a Adriatic coast. And Naplosia took the rest of the Samnites. Now the Samnites, seeing this, are very mad that they didn't even get to have their nation survive. We quickly see that over here, due to the Roman expansion policy, they kind of bought this area. And quickly the Naplosians have a very nice border, which I kind of hate, but sometimes you need to allow something to exist to allow something to not exist. And that is what I'm going to allow to be here. Basically, I'm going to allow these nations to be. But turns out, during the battle for the capital of Samnium, the capital being Samna, we quickly see that this capital was so severely attacked and so severely punished for its whatever crimes it had done that it kind of collapsed. And yeah. Now we could say that this guy is on the par with you know who, for having like a capital and that. But let me remind you, a capital that's a city means that you're multiple times stronger than any nation that has just gained some land. That means they are stronger than this guy by only a slim margin. They are definitely stronger than this guy. Stronger than this guy. Not so stronger than this guy because of the many things that they have here. And definitely these two combined would destroy these. But Rome, beginning to become very strong, sees a large amount of its compatriots from the south start to kind of beef. That being the Carthaginians and the Naplosians. Why do the Naplosians and Carthaginians beef? Well, the Naplosian recent king, or the prince, so to say, because he wasn't really crowned king, but he acts as the king, so kinda wants these territories over here back, like these territories that you can see. And Carthagia, having the vastly larger empire and about to allow this area over here to be integrated in some form into Finland, about to give this area over because they really didn't want it. I have been so far. But yeah, they have been very much doing a lot of stuff here. They've been integrating the coastal regions more than they have been annexing the more northern regions. Well, integrating, that is, not an annexing. But we quickly see that due to their many integrations and basically takeovers of territories over here, Valencia, well, Malaga quickly loses all of its former people that were like very... Like, it loses its old territories over here. Malaga will still come into existence, although as not the capital of this thing, it doesn't even have a capital at this point. And to be honest, I'm just doing this so we can see how large Carthage is beginning. And to be honest, Carthage is still a very large nation by a very large margin. The problem is, every time it tries to get larger, the Valencians and the Malagans and everyone else in the capital are like, stop, it's not good. And the king is getting a bit annoyed with these guys. But he does listen, somewhat. But now going back over here, we see that the Napoleons have the Napoleon prince decides to send out a mercenary party to attack this area over here. Now he sends it out to attack both of these villages, trying to cripple the Carthaginian response time. But we quickly see that the Carthaginians quickly took back the regions over here. And seeing that these mercenaries had some flags of the Napoleons, the king had enough justification to say, okay, we're going to do the same to you because we know that it was yours. And if you apologize now, we will stop our plundering of your village and probably even your town, as we're on the gates of it and we're basically knocking on it. And the Napoleon current king, who's still very, very old, sees his son doing the stupidest shit, and he's like, okay, you're not the crown prince, get the second prince over here. Okay, second prince, you're the heir to my throne now. I know you haven't gone through the proper procedures, but you were trained in case of anything, so you're in, you're. And we quickly see that Napoleon just gives over these territories and is forced in the peace treaty to give, like, it was almost forced to give this over. Eventually, due to the first prince's arrogancy, and he stormed basically into the chamber, opened the doors, yelled at the top of his lungs against his father for, quote unquote, betraying the country, and then he was dragged out. And then he was also arrested for basically treason. And in Napoleon, if you're a king, it doesn't matter if you do something that is treasonous, you still did something that's treasonous and you're not a king anymore. For Carthage, seeing that happen and the son being dragged away, it just showed Napoleon as a dumbass. And the king there heavily apologized for that, and the once good territories that they were about to retake became Carthaginian, because the Carthaginian king was like, okay, this insults me. How have you let your son be such a brat and act so stupidly? And the reason why the Venetian Pact, well, not the Venetian Pact, but the Pact of the Shield, which is basically a pact of military alliance over here, wasn't activated at the free point, and the syndicate of the Mediterranean didn't get, well, brought in, was because Carthage was letting it slide and Napoleon was going to let it slide until the sun kinda came in, and now it's kinda so and so. But many hardline guys over here are still getting very mad at this. Now going over to Venetia, you have been buying back some territories, even though it's at a large price. You have been buying these territories back one by one to rebuild your empire. Although you are doing so, it's once you got to Florence, the only way you could get that town was by selling some of the slaves that you had on hand to help you rebuild. And basically, Venice wants its former glory back, but as you can see, it's not getting that very much. Basically, it's getting a bit costly for them to do so. And to be honest, they're not in the best state to do so. But once they got over to this nation, took some of its southern regions by supplying it with a lot of silver and a lot of gold, we quickly see that not only did they try to extort this guy over here that was in charge of these four things over here, these five villages, they tried to even get the local lords over here to side with them in this thing, and this country was like, no, we're not gonna allow you to do that, partially because we fucking hate you, and partially because we also don't like you anymore. And the first thing they did was send some raiding parties in from the villages. And once the first little village was raided, Venice had the proper justification. It levied a small army, went to war, kinda won a bit, they like, since its fall, it didn't have this much of a military to begin with, like to defend itself. But once it took this and started to move a bit more south to take the rest over here, it was already very important for the Croats over here to defend their own homeland. And we quickly see that once the Venetians retook some of their dozens of islands over here and used those islands to invade over here and almost take that town over here. How would they take that? Peninsular movement, of course, and they even took this by Peninsular movement. The Croats were forced to kind of surrender. Now the Croats would try and mitigate the damage to the nation. Sadly, the first peace treaty gave away all of that. They didn't even get what they very much asked for. And when they started to insist on everything over here being like not taken and them not losing much of the lands, the Venetians agreed on that only if they got the coastal regions, that is. Why the coastal regions? At this point in the Adriatic, having coastal regions is more important than having interior lands. Even though it's very much costs a lot to maintain the coastal regions and the interior lands. The Croats very much knew that if Venice got these areas and got their capital, they would lose a lot of trade and they would be crippled. And that's what actually happened. They would be crippled and they would be forced into their southern neighbor to kind of, you know, defend their own lands. Now, if we go from where the Venetians were before, we see that they were here before, and now they made a whopping movement into this nation. Currently, this nation has kinda collapsed, but we know it very much hasn't. And now going over here, the Mysorean king, King Janohid, or Jano, as he's known best, the beloved, has died of old age. More likely disease, more likely it was some kind of old disease that kinda came up with him, but eventually he died, leaving behind his 4 sons and his brother, who is now the acting emperor, as the oldest son of Janohid is only 17 and not ready for the throne at all. Currently, we see that Janohid is currently in the process of training the 3rd and 4th army, going between them to train them accordingly, and sometimes going over to the 1st army to ask them for the status up here, as they have sent a lot of people over here to kind of monitor the northern borders. But once Janohid comes into office, well, not office, but in power, he does what his brother did, and that was the last thing his brother very much wanted to do, and that was ask the Ankarans for something that the Ankarans would be able to give them, but would be very, very reluctant about. And that would be a eternal peace and co-prosperity agreement, which at this point in time is very, very much outdated. Well, not in date, basically. It's way ahead of its time, and the idea of such a act is mind-blowing to the Ankarans. The Ankaran king, who was very close to Janohid and was basically a brother, because he was technically the 3rd cousin of his. Basically, like the 3rd cousin, by that I mean like cousin in the way that they shared family. Janohid's mother basically came from the Hicks house. The Hicks house is related to the Hickson house. The Hickson house's mistress was Alkale. Alkale was the basically grandmother to Ankaros. And we clearly see that Ankaros and Jano was technically truly brothers, in some sense. And we quickly see that Genahid would honor that brotherly thing by making relations with Ankyras through the official. He would ask Ankyras to attend this funeral that would go through one very hellish phase, and that phase was basically for the king, the prior king of the empire of, well, Mesoa. He would be given the honor of going through the heartlands one by one in a spiral, as it would be his last wish to see his own territory for the last time. And we quickly see that the spiral would widen and widen, going through many regions until it would spiral out of control and start to go to Ankyras. Ankyras, he would very much allow this royal procession to happen, and Genahid wanted to be buried where his mother was buried, as his mother was buried very far from the capital of Ankara. But we see that for this royal procession, Ankara was made the temporary capital, as the old capital was refitted. We quickly see that the old capital was given that thing, but eventually the royal procession went through the waters to let Genahid see his own last territories. And lastly, in the village of Alkam, it's basically ALQ.am. And we quickly see that it would stop in this village over here. And throughout this royal procession, Genahid would see his last lands, his own lands and his brother nation's lands. And it would eventually give Genahid the ability to see what his brother wanted to see. And he would, at his brother's funeral in a humble village, finally, for the first time in years, cry in front of his own troops. He had a very close relationship with his brother. Those two loved each other like nothing else. And when his brother died and Ankyras came to comfort him, he broke down. He swore, if it meant the end of his life, that he would keep the empire together for his brother, and he would do what his brother did. Be a benevolent leader that tried to help the people as much as possible. It would send shocks through Mesoa to lose Emperor Genahid, the beloved, and royal mourning days would be diverted to be, well, mourning days for the father and the grandfathers of the nation, for Genahid himself, as 10 days of mourning were declared. And everyone was already mourning 11 days, a day before it was declared. And when it was declared, millions, if not like tens of thousands, came to see Genahid's body. This royal procession took around 2 months to complete. We quickly see that these 4 towns would honor Genahid by raising flags of the capital and basically the sun of the one thing that they were basically very proud of: the purple garments of Genahid. Eventually it would be made very important to the surrounding nations that Emperor Genahid had died, and not only would the enemies of basically Mesoa come to see this royal procession, but once they went into Ankyras, many Greek leaders came to see the royal procession, and even in Bulgosks emperor, well, not emperor, but the king, came through the lands hastily to see this. And once he saw Janohit, the guy who once asked him if they could at some point see a world not plagued with war, but plagued with only peace and prosperity, Bulgosk's king had no words. Janohit was very much beloved in a very wide sphere, as we see that even in Aplosia he was known, although in Carthagia he was less known. He was still known to the Emperor of Carthagia, and news of his death would even reach the far corners of the world, as we quickly see that in those areas over here and the Catholics areas over here, news of it would reach not only them, but even to Roscovia, where songs of him had been told by the Mizon travelers. This is how far the death of Janohit and the news of it reached. This will be known as the rise and death episodes, and Janohit from his beginning was said to be cursed. He proved that cursed label wrong. When he was born, his mother died due to complications during birth. She had only a few moments to talk before she would be put to bed and put her into a resting state. Eventually, she saw during that one fateful sunrise in the morning as her baby, the King Janohit, who died at 61 years old, not 61 but 60 to 65 years old, she saw what he would become, and she gave him the name Jano. That meant a beautiful pink sunrise. The words came from the word sunrise and pink. Pink for the Iberians and for the Ankarans was very summarizingly very similar, as it was only 3 letters for these guys, while it was 5 for these. And we clearly see that she was born all the way in Portugal. Over the time, she was brought to Valencia, from where she grew up into a fine young lady. She eventually reached over here, where she was where her mother was married to an Anatolian general who had also gained noble status. She eventually, well, the words I was going to say were Jade. Jade was technically Jad, like J, A, and D. It's like this, but the D has like an asterisk on it, and the Jad has 2 like this. And over here in Portugal, it's Joda. Basically, very similar, but not as similar. But you could basically call them the same word. And we see that not only would she say Janohit's name to be Jano, but due to Janohit's very careful nature, eventually his father would see him as weak. He would pity him, of course, but the father brought together a lot more than he thought he could, and he didn't want to give the throne to Janohit or Janohit. Alas, during the times where Janohit was twice ambushed by rebels who, well, not the rebels, but people who saw him as cursed, and a few bad famines in and around these areas being blamed on Janohit. These radicalists who fought getting rid of Janohit would bring the famines to an end, would be killed at Janohit. Himself would fight in the front lines as his troops were to be killed. He stepped in and took out any type of enemy that tried to step in his way. Janohit would be eventually commended for royalty, loyal duties, and he would be commended for great bravery during battle. Janohit would be the ruler of the Messoan Empire and the bringer of great prosperity, even during the last hardships of his career as king and emperor. He saw a lot, but he did not falter. In Cataric, 2 days of special mourning were devoted to him for 2 years and 2 nights. These 2 years and 2 nights, basically 2 nights, would stand guard, like knights. Not, I didn't mean like night, but night. Basically, soldier, not the daytime thing or nighttime thing. But basically, these soldiers would stand guard at a temple erected over here for Janohit, and a replica of Janohit's head garment, which would resemble his brother's Janohit's general outfit, would be put there. It would be known as the treasure of Cataric, and the temple would be known as the Temple of Great Mourning. Now that that's done, let's go to the Indus. As the Indus have finally gotten a very large problem for themselves. And the problem is that down here they are very much not liked by the people, and eventually empires will try and attack, although they would be again and again and again stopped before they could do anything. The clear instability would start to plague them, and we see that over in the north, nations would demand their independence, and over time the independence would be granted and it would be sealed. Many of these people would start to demand their independence in the form of independent countries and independent nations. And quickly we see that these countries would start to make a word called Calicut. This Calicut would mean caliphate, but the word caliphate would eventually reach the areas over here in Armenia's puppet, where it would eventually reach Armenia, and eventually would reach Cataric. The caliphate status would also start to bring very much of a meaning to itself in southern Iberia, well, not Iberia but Persia, where we see that the Persian nobles would start to list themselves as caliphators, or the followers of a great caliphate, and that meant basically their own nation. They were the followers of it. They worshipped it, basically. And over time, the word for it became more and more meaningful, until we have a very special thing happening. But not before that. We see that many of these regions over here would eventually be sold over to the Armenian puppets over here, or Armenian puppet. And we quickly see that the last of these regions that would be sold would be basically bordering this last, and I mean last bordering area of the Indus and Armenians. And we see that these new nations that are now very much trying to exist and trying to not go under each other's radars start to fight each other. The first fight is after this nation sold its lands over here to Armenia. Other nations saw it as weak, so a double fight for their independence started, and we quickly see that the attacks proved to be too much for this nation, and they quickly fell under very large circumstances. This nation over here did manage to do a lot against their enemy over here. Eventually this guy would destroy this guy, wars would plague this guy, and we eventually see that empires would start to form, only to fall or rise again. We see that two main nations would take over the central areas over here, while over here this nation would take over the south. Eventually would go to war against the Indos, who would have an incompetent leader at this point in time, and we quickly see that the incompetent leader would lose this battle, bringing down the Indos nation's name. And basically, seeing this, many other nations wanted independence, and so did happen. And we quickly see that the nation over here that would spring up in southern India would quickly be the first to spring up in any point of land over here. We even see that another nation, more metallic at this point, in color, would take over this region. Another nation would take over this area over here in like attempts to just take it over. And we quickly see that the Indos Empire would lose its status as an Indos Empire, as it wouldn't be very Indos anymore. Although it would be the emperor of these regions that would hold together the entire areas over here, but eventually nations would start to form out of other nations' borders, and we quickly see that many more nations start to appear in this world. Again, many, but I'm gonna get into that later. But eventually, over here, Yolkaji and this nation decide that it's about time to see who's on top, and due to this guy having more territory and more population, it manages to do a lot better in terms of its military. Although Yolkaji did lose the Great Lee War, it managed to bounce back, basically almost unharmed, although it did lose a lot of land. It eventually managed to launch a counterattack by using a very unknown strategy that was flanking. They flanked and forced over here by using both armies that they had mobilized, and they quickly had used a very clever strategy of making a very small corridor for the enemy to escape from, and we quickly see that once they were in this village, they were cut off and they were destroyed. Eventually, Yolkaji would start their great retaking of that old territory, and the Northern Chinese, Northern Koreans would look on this later and be like, why didn't we join in? But currently we see that the Yolkaji managed to retake a lot of land that they, well, in return for winning, they got a lot of territory, a lot of land, and we quickly see that they managed to expand their nation this way, although I like these borders more for this guy, so I don't know, maybe I'll just keep those borders. You know what, I'll just quickly draw a good priestry team, semi-good at least. Yeah, this border looks good enough. Yep. And we see that the takeover of these regions for Yolkaji will be very good, making them a very good looking nation. For Meldri, the Meldris, they will also be taking some territory as per Yolkaji wanting to further disappoint the guys over here by allowing another nation to take a lot of territory. At this point, Meldri has been moving a lot this way and are very large. One of the larger nations in East Asia. But over here we see that the Eilungs begin a war of reclamation of their own territories. Although they start very strong, they instantly get pocket lost, and they instantly also lose more territory in the peace treaty. So very bad of them. Over here they managed to do some bad, managed to take some territory back. They are now emboldened again, but they're not gonna be that bold. Over here though, this nation for the first time sees its patience being tested, as this nation quickly invades and occupies this area, demanding it for itself, because it frankly doesn't have any, would have, but doesn't have any naval territory to speak of. And this guy showed its strength by kicking them out, and even kicking their ass a bit, showing them who's boss in the region, and even pushing them back. How did they do that? Warrior culture. That's all that I'm going to say. This guy eventually manned up and bought these territories over here, although it did lose a good bit of land before that, and a good bit of money before that too. They were kind of stupid at the beginning, and so makes sense why they'd lose money and land. This guy taking over these areas decided to just give these areas back, and yeah. But at this point, the Han shogunate decided that this shogunate down south, the red, how to say this, the meatmen. Basically, these guys were really much against their own wants to not become a shogunate. And we quickly see they eventually became a shogunate. The reason why they weren't a shogunate before, size. Eventually they convinced this area almost to join them. Although Kyushu, the Kyushans kind of took some territories back over here in a war that they fought for these areas. These guys managed to sort of take over the last surviving bits, making a pretty good empire for themselves. The Huns will start some battles, but we quickly see that I'm running out of time for this video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye!